Become a member, sign in, and start streaming today.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Friday, March 13th, 2020 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let me introduce our esteemed panel. Patty Calhoun from Westford joins us, along with Laura Carno from Faster Colorado. Laura, thank you. It's your first show. Glad that you're here. Lucille Wenegema, a communications consultant from Cleo's Creative, and Leanne Wheeler from Wheeler Advisory Group, and an Air Force vet. Ladies, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. It's going to be one of our smarter shows as long as I get out of the way. Let's start with the topic that everyone is talking about, the state and national reaction to the COVID-19 virus. Governor Polis declared a state of emergency earlier this week and started a drive-through testing facility which is dealing with long waits and is now reverted to a voucher system for testing. President Trump addressed the nation about the issue on Wednesday night, and new developments continue regarding the availability of testing. Patty, let's begin with you. There's so much here. We may take a couple whacks at this, but your initial reactions at our historic week, and specifically with reaction to the virus.
Well, I have to say, you know you're in trouble when you go back and read Catherine N. Porter's Pale Horse, Pale Rider, which many of us avoided in high school. She was a reporter at the Rocky Mountain News in 1918, came down with the Spanish flu, barely survived, and emerged to find out that her fiancé, who was an Army lieutenant waiting to go overseas, had died after he tended her. And it's the most feverish, hypnotic piece of writing, and it's oddly reassuring because you realize that 100 years ago, this was far worse. I mean, 500 million people were infected by the Spanish flu. 50 million died, and somehow the world continued. So when you take solace from that, you know you're in trouble. Just today, Governor Polis, about 10 this morning, announced that small groups over 250 are not supposed to meet in Colorado. He announced that probably we will soon see the first death in this state of coronavirus. Still, 73 positive tests so far. It is not that huge, but there could be many more, which is why we're taking all these precautions, and they're coming so fast. Colorado Symphony Orchestra just canceled. MCA Denver just closed. It's almost impossible to keep track of everything except that stay safe, stay sane.
Mm-hmm. Laura, when you look at the reaction so far, and there's really a lot of different ways you can look at it. We've seen it from the civic level, from cities. You've seen it from the state with Governor Polis. You've seen it from the nation with President Trump, and everything in between, from grocery store toilet paper stocks to how we should travel. What stands out to you as some of the more important points that we should be thinking about as we look at this week?
Yeah, and I'll add to that, the NBA and
Yes.
a lot of private organizations that have done what they should do. You look at the curve, and we talk a lot about the what those curves look like, the bell curve of any virus. I'm not a doctor, but I've seen a bell curve. The bell curve, how big is that bell curve going to be? And I think with the governor, the president, local mayors, private companies making these decisions to cancel big events, and I'm okay with even canceling smaller events. I don't think we're going to look back in a few weeks when I think we're going to be on the other side of that bell curve. I don't think we're going to look back and say, gosh, we should have kept more things open. I think that having kind of an aggressive stance toward this is okay. And when you look at the any negative side of this and say, well, we're going to have to stay home and watch Netflix more, or read actual books or something.
PBS 12.
Or PBS 12. Okay, so
yeah.
we can do those things. We can take more calls instead of coffees or lunches. So I think that it's good that we're taking a strong stand.
It's a great point, Laura. Lucille, as you look at this, it's when you're dealing with something like this, I believe it does rise above partisan politics. But the fact is, we're in an election year, and we have, frankly, just a very political society. If you were going to talk about your favorite coffee flavor, somehow it's going to get political. As you look at the reactions so far and how civic entities are handling this, from a mayor to a governor to a president and the way around, what are some of the things that strike you?
Yeah, for me, I think what really stands out is our different ideas of preparedness, right? What does it mean to be prepared? I think that's influenced, it should primarily be influenced by the data, right? What we're seeing in other places, what the infrastructure that we have on a local, state, and national level. And I think Governor Polis has really modeled what that can look like for us here in Colorado. I think that lots of governors and national officials are thinking, how do we continue national society, the things that really kind of keep our society moving in things like this, whether that's voting, whether that's business. I think lots of people are looking to the stock market. So it's really important that leaders all across the country are really looking at this outside of the partisan lens. Like you said, it's extremely hard to do, particularly because when we're talking about economic impact, that is an extremely political thing. Yes, some of us will be able to just sit at home and watch Netflix, but some of us will be losing out on valuable work, whether that's shift workers, whether that's freelance workers, people that are in the event space. So lots of people will be financially impacted, and on the other side of this bell curve, it will be hard to see in what ways, but we do know that some of the people among us will be really hard hit, and that is inherently political.
Leanne, let me lean on your Air Force experience here, because I imagine, well, everyone has very particular jobs in any sort of armed forces. There's that preparation for anything. From what you've seen so far, are we seeing the appropriate response, or are there some lessons to already have been learned?
There are lessons to already have been learned. You know, I checked in with my niece down at the Air Force Academy and asked about when they went to essential personnel only. I knew the preparation was in place. What's striking about what we've discussed thus far is this idea of flattening the curve. There's the political lens on that. And then, as I like to think about our societies, there's sort of the celebrity lens. And I think it struck society hardest when we heard that Tom Hanks and his wife, in fact, tested positive for coronavirus. And so there were folks who were already out procuring TP. There were folks that were out buying some of the oddest things, but certainly being prepared for any and every scenario is where we want to be as a society. In particular, in times like these, we've seen a lot going on with travel bans anyway, and things going on overseas militarily. And so I would think that we'd want to be a society that's prepared for any circumstance. This has caught us flat-footed at every level of government. I agree that at the end of the day, we will not regret standing down some of these meetings and sessions. I believe, though, we will regret not having done it sooner and not having passed critical legislation, which is a political matter, around family leave, around health care, around the things that are going to be evident we should have done in the first place before such a catastrophe like this could even strike.
Well, let's take that as just a quick second round on the same issue. Patty, there's the reaction we've seen so far, and then how this is going to change the frame of reference on everything from the election to the session, when it kicks up again. There's a great possibility here that priorities for us as a society, and if we just stick to Colorado and for that we might see that. So what if we can use our flawed crystal ball, what are some of those issues you think are going to be starting to pop up because of what we've experienced so far?
Well, let's go back to the short-term issues, which is Denver Public Schools last night announced that they're going to go on spring break early and extend it. So you talk about the parents who are going to have to figure out how to take care of their kids when they might have to keep their jobs if they're going to keep their paychecks. They can't work remotely. An awful lot of people cannot work remotely. So they're going to have to figure out how this is going to work. And they're going to be people who, when we come out, assuming we do on the other side of the bell curve, they're going to be broke. That money is going to be a real issue. You look at the artists and all the different people, event planners, all the different people who are losing those paychecks and are not going to be paid remotely. They're not going to have paid family leave. It's going to be very, very tough. There are going to be huge segments of our society that are going to be underwater.
Laura, I don't want to ever say there's anything good out of a crisis, but it feels that one of the positive ramifications of other crises in the past have been that can help some sort of bipartisan work. After 9/11, even a very visceral differences got Democrats, Republicans to work together on at least some issues, because a society, D or R or unaffiliated, say this is now a priority. Do you think there's even a glimmer of a shot of increased bipartisanship in the reaction moving forward from this?
Sure, and you look at the bill working its way through Congress in some manner. And I would say get the politics out of that thing. If we can come together and say this is about relief, whether we're talking about the need for more testing, the need for whatever sort of medical attention, or a payroll tax holiday, so that today in my paycheck I have that money today. I think there are some things that we can all look at and say these would be helpful. But when politicians add pork and earmarks and other priorities to that, I think it really dilutes what we really should be doing, coming together to solve this problem.
Lucille, what about you? Do you feel optimistic that there is a glimmer or shot, at least even a portion? I'm one of the diehard optimists at the table, so I'll admit that freely, that there could be some progress moving forward on some larger issues?
You know, I would like to think of myself as an optimist as well. I think more than anything, we have our best wishes of what could happen. I think people will be vocal. If we have broad swaths of our community that are really hurting, it's going to be a lot harder for partisan political actors to stay rooted in their own sort of ways, as opposed to doing what's right for their constituencies. So whether or not, it comes from a kumbaya, or whether it comes from, citizens really holding their leadership accountable, I think it can happen. That being said, we have these models. There are other countries that are dealing with this as well. We've seen countries that are farther along. We've been talking about the curb. We've seen what's happened in China. We've seen what happened in Italy, Iran, Israel. There are forces outside, or entities outside of the United States, that we can look to and say, okay, this we like, this we don't like, and incorporate those in really critical ways, as long as we're not getting in front of ourselves with partisanship.
Leanne, you'll be the last word on this. Can we learn those lessons? Can we learn them quickly, seeing how big of a society, how big of a country we are?
Yes, I think Lucille hit the nail on the head. We can infuse money when we're talking about our national defense. We know how to infuse money when we're talking about the stock market. Trillions flowed just yesterday after the downturn in the Dow. So we know how to do it. And I think it will be a matter of we the people standing up, reminding our representative government that they do in fact work for us, and that we know what we need in particular during dire circumstances. And so I think it's going to take both a benevolent government and a leadership that figures out what's in it for me to do the right thing so that I can keep my seat, and we the people who understand how to get folks out of seats in the event they do not.
The Colorado legislature will likely pass a bill today that provides flexibility for political parties trying to handle caucuses and other business in what is usually a very busy primary season. The legislature itself will likely close next week, and this in the heels of just last Saturday of big precinct caucuses where Andrew Romanoff scored a key victory. Laura, there's a lot to choose from there, but we've been talking about the general society impact of the COVID virus, but now we have the realities of being political, and it's just the knocking on doors and shaking hands. Well, at this point, probably not so much of that, and getting signatures. We're right in the heat of primary season. Do you expect that to maybe stretch into the summer? How do you think this is being handled?
Yeah, so the political parties are going to have some flexibility to figure that out. So it'll be interesting to see what solutions they come up with. They're non-government organizations, so they'll come up with things. We've talked about Zoom and Skype and lots of different ways to hold different meetings. The county assemblies, the district assemblies, state assemblies are huge, very important in Colorado for people to come together and delegates to cast their vote. So that's going to be very interesting to see. I actually attend my neighborhood caucus, and some good things about it to get activists, but certainly some downsides. I was interested to see how small they were, and it was right at the beginning of, gosh, are we going to have this virus? Is this going to become something? And a lot of people who had registered stayed home. You mentioned Andrew Romanoff. Caucuses do bring out people who are maybe not in the center, maybe people who are on the edges, and so it'll be interesting to see if that lead for him extends into the actual primary.
Lucille, what do we think as we're looking at this process? It is politics starts with one-on-one. Can you look me in the eye and tell me what you're going to do, and if I like that or I don't like that. Now, clearly, you can get all the way to just send me an email or I can see an ad on TV, but the impact this can make on a pretty important election at every level, from dog catcher to president. This is an important election in 2020. What do you think from what we've seen so far and the flexibility that the parties are going to be provided?
There are two things that I would really hope that we focus on. One is, were caucuses the best way to do it to begin with? Traditionally, caucuses have been on weekday nights. Thankfully, this time around, it was on a weekend, so there was a little bit more accessibility there. As Lauren, I believe, said, the people that can actually make it to a caucus tend to be on the fringes, and a lot of that has to do with most of us are just doing what we got to do. This Saturday, Oprah was also in town. It's really hard to beat that act. So caucuses in general, while they do sort of capture the spirit of that community exchange, were they the best way to do it to begin with? Secondly, beyond the process of how to kind of get this moving, we also have to think about the community discourse. If people are sequestered, people are at home more, people aren't going to their local meetings, their even restaurants, places where you're likely to kind of pick your friend's brain about things, you're not going to have as much of an open discourse outside of any sort of system that parties end up defaulting to. So while I love that there's some more flexibility involved, and I think it's letting us think critically about what was working to begin with, I think there's some things that are just going to be outside of party control or party planning.
Leanne, what do we think about that point? I mean, Laura and Lucille bring up some great points. Are we going to see some evolution of just even the very structure of how we do local democracy because of what impact it's going to have this year?
I think we better figure out how to evolve. I'm expecting a mass exodus, a secondary mass exodus from both parties again this election cycle. As we're being more flexible about how we allow folks to inform the process, I have a valid concern, a real concern, about how that affects the actual election and dates that we've already set through statute as to when things need to be accomplished. And so we had a difficult time in the last cycle in Aurora, for instance, with our electoral process, and nothing had happened other than folks got their ballots and they were incorrect in some cases, and we needed to get them in by a certain date. So I am concerned, and it is not just a bipartisan concern, but for those of us who are unaffiliated, who are already a little skeptical of the process, not able to participate in caucus anyway. We're watching with great interest as to what gets resolved and then what it looks like through the election cycle. We've got to come up.
Patty, it's easy on kind of in a program like this that we can talk kind of the inside baseball politics, but the fact of the matter is assemblies for parties make a big difference. Darrell Glenn, it was a legitimate and, frankly, when everything was said and done, the dust was settled, a very competitive Senate candidate who came out of nowhere and rose out of a pool at a state assembly, and that changed the Senate race completely. So this isn't just to be taken lightly, but clearly going to be changed like everything else. Romanoff results, the state assembly, the flexibility, take your pick. What do you think?
Well, first of all, we've seen that the legislature, when it needs to, can actually move fast. I mean, right now, the legislature is dealing with things that are in the statutes on the 120-day session. Can it not be consecutive? Can they take a break? Changing the statutory requirements for those county and state assemblies, which are critical right now to how we have people nominated. You know, Diane Bray, who's a very interesting Senate candidate, has just suspended her campaign. She came out, I think, at 5% in the caucuses, not as high, obviously, as others, but still a promising candidate because she could petition onto the ballot, but how do you walk around right now and ask people to sign petitions? She is not the only one. My inbox is flooded with people who are saying, we're suspending campaigns right now while we think about things to do. So that is something definitely Coloradans are going to have to think about before we get to the primary. Speaking of primaries, the presidential primary here showed just how well some things can work. It was a little unfortunate that so many people on the ballot had already dropped off compared to the caucus in 2016 for the presidential primary. So I think it is time to really look at our caucuses aside from coronavirus. What's the best way to really deal with nominating people here?
Things got heated at the State House floor last week during a debate about immigration. The bill being discussed would allow private lawsuits against law enforcement agencies if they conducted civil arrests in a courthouse. The bill's sponsor said the goal is for victims of crimes to feel safe going to the courthouse. Opponents say the bill would harm law enforcement. Lucille, clearly this issue is not going to go away. Even if we're dealing with the bell curve of the virus for a while, immigration has been an issue from day one until the end of the republic. On this particular one, where do you see the Colorado legislature going once it's back doing its thing?
You know, I don't want to predict, where things are going to go, but I do want to talk about why it's important to be thinking about this. If we want people who are in this country to be part of our process and to actually do what we want them to do in terms of being legally registered, then we have to make sure that that process is one that they can actually take part in. The looming threat of incarceration when you are actually trying to do what you're supposed to do is a very active deterrent. Now, does that need to be private prosecution? I'm not sure that it necessarily has to be that, but I think that we do have to think really critically about how we hold law enforcement accountable and what arenas they should be able to have full reign on, and really thinking of that with the idea of how do we make this work, not necessarily how do we throw people in the system.
Leanne, law enforcement and immigration, the politics around that it's hard to get spicier than those two. What do you think is going to come out of this again once a session is back? That's probably going to be after a break from the virus.
Listen, it is unreasonable to arrest people at the courthouse. It just is unreasonable. And when we look back over our own history, pick the demographic. Right now we're looking at immigrants, but there are demographics in this nation that were arrested in places that they thought were safe spaces long before now. I don't know how you legislate a private lawsuit against a law enforcement entity. We haven't figured out how to do that with regard to police brutality. So we've got to figure out a way to hold space for what law enforcement's role is, their roles and responsibilities, and ensure that that is the role and responsibility. The court has its own role and responsibility, and then those as citizens who are wanting to live in a chaos-free, safe, and healthy society, we have our duty as well. And those are three lanes, and the thought that if I exercise my right as a resident here, I reside here, whether or not I can show you paperwork, in the moment I'm in this space, and I'm engaging a process that I believe that I can engage, and then on the backside of that, potentially I'm arrested. So there's something inherently wrong with that process, and we need to tend to it.
Patty, what do you think? Where does this go from here? And does it get adjusted with a deep breath? If you have a heated debate, sometimes you need a deep breath just to get things back on track.
No, this is a fiery, hot topic, and it will come back into play again as soon as people are thinking about other things. It's not just at the courthouse, but that is really an issue. If you can't have someone come be a witness in the process, much less be a more advanced participant, that's a problem. You also have the census, for example, right now, and undocumented immigrants are supposed to participate in that, but they're frightened to do it because if someone, well, anyone's going to be scared now when people are knocking on their door, but if they're an undocumented immigrant, they might be really frightened of someone knocking on their door. On top of that, we have the federal government basically threatening Denver and other places they call so-called sanctuary cities with withholding money, withholding grants. Will that affect the coronavirus money?
Good question. Laura, wrap it up for us. We're not going to solve immigration today, but what do you think are some of the important things we should take from what we've seen so far?
Right. We talked about the lanes. We've got a law enforcement lane that I think is very confusing. We have federal law, we have state law, and if this isn't clear that you're supposed to follow a judge's order, and then you could be sued personally, and slippery slope for other things possibly that could somebody who is subject to a red flag order, could they sue that law enforcement? I mean, you could look at every single law this way, so slippery slope.
Indeed. It's time to get to our very favorite part of the show, a disgrace of the week. As always, Ms. Calhoun, please start us off.
Going to Leanne's town. Okay, so a year ago, an Aurora police officer on duty with a gun strapped on passes out in his running police car in Aurora. He's not fired. He's counseled. He's suspended for a few days. Damning report from John Walsh yesterday about how Aurora Police Department leadership failed that city.
Laura.
Yeah, I wish I could agree with that even more and not say my own, but I'm going to. I'm going to reiterate, get the pork out of this federal bill so that we are only talking about what's going to help with the virus and help with those most financially impacted by the virus.
Lucille.
You know, I feel a bit hypocritical going this way as a communications consultant on a show, but the media. I think the media is really fueling a lot of the hysteria. There's a really fine line between hysteria, preparedness, and denial. And I think the media is pushing us in a lot of really different ways due to the ways that it has reported.
Leanne.
I have the House Bill 1319 blues, Dominic. We have figured out a way in lobbying to pit folks with an addiction to nicotine against other folks with an addiction to nicotine as we're having a conversation about flavor ban. And so there are specific demographics that this legislature has decided they're going to protect and specific demographics that they've decided they're not going to protect, with an idea that that money is needed to fulfill some campaign promises that folks have made along the path. And so for me, that entire activity is the disgrace of the week.
Time to say something nice about somebody. Patty?
We mentioned it last week, but I was honored to be put in the Tourism Hall of Fame by Visit Denver Wednesday night, and possibly the last big event in Denver for a very long time. The tourism and hospitality industry in this city and this state are so important, and they are going to be hit very, very hard. A lot of good people are going to be hurt.
They made a great call putting you in the Hall of Fame. Laura.
Yeah, and along those lines, people are voluntarily out there on the socials saying, if you don't want to go to a restaurant because you're concerned about the crowd, go buy a gift card. If you go to the restaurant, triple your tip because these are the people that need it. So kudos to those folks.
Lucille.
Yeah, similar to social media activity, I would like to say something nice about all the people that are banding around to make sure that community resources are still being distributed for those of us who are vulnerable during this time.
You're here. Leanne.
I want to mention that Providence at the Heights, our 50-unit permanent supportive housing development in Aurora, is fully leased up. We have now provided housing for 50 families in the city of Aurora. In spite of our police force, we do a good thing every now and then.
And I want to thank all of you, our viewers and our members out there. The reason that we can come do this show every week is for all of you that have become a member, and whether it's because of PBS 12 Passport and watching all the shows you want to there, or simply because you enjoy this show and want to make sure it continues. We are just wrapping up our March Pledge Drive, and you've helped make that possible. So thank you very much. And if you're looking for something to do, whether you want more information on a science show, or maybe you want an escape from everything that we're doing, PBS12.org offers a whole lot of opportunity for you. So we're there for you either way. That is all the time we have for this episode of Colorado Inside Out. For everybody here at PBS 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.